So Dave's going to join us with a panel of practitioners across BC's economy that every day are contemplating the interests and competing interests of a myriad of stakeholders that rarely agree, but when they do, great things happen. Our first panelist is my friend Jay Schlosar. Jay is the Director of Community and Indigenous Affairs with Teck Resources, one of Canada's leading mining companies with operations throughout both North and South America. Teck, as many of you know, is recognized regularly, including last year with Corporate Knights for their Global 100 list of most sustainable corporations. And they're also the founders of the Global Zinc Initiative with UNICEF that's literally saving thousands of lives of people in developing countries suffering from dysentery. And they've reached with the Government of Canada and UNICEF 3.8 million women and children as of last year. Our next panelist is Steve Vanagas. Steve is the Vice President of Customer Communication and Public Affairs with TransLink, which manages Metro Vancouver's region's transportation system. And they carry on average more than 500,000 customers each day and have more than 7,700 staff across the network. Steve's also invested in his community, and I know personally because he was a co-coach with me in the Forest Hills Little League, and he has much more talent in his job than he does coaching baseball. TransLink balances a myriad of different stakeholders, including riders, drivers, employees, multiple municipal governments and businesses and individuals, all impacted by projects, operations, and their ability to move both to and from work, but also the things that they need to do in their daily lives. And finally, our contributing moderator. Our program listed our friend Thorin Hudema, who was with Amazon, who was regrettably taken away from the city today and can't join us. But she's been ably replaced with our friend Heather Owen. Many of you will know Heather in her role as Vice President General Manager of North America Polling and Research firm Leger in Western Canada. Heather hails from Winnipeg and has served on a number of organizations that have led British Columbia engagement, including her role as the Director of RBC Royal Bank, heading up the bank's brand and community sponsorship in BC, both through the formation of the RBC Grand Fondo, as well as the 2010 Winter Olympics. But on an annual basis, Heather partnered and mentored 500 organizations through the philanthropic capital that RBC displaced in the community. She currently serves on the community boards of the Arts Umbrella and was previously co-chair of the Vancouver Festival of Light Fireworks Celebration. Leger, as many of you know, is North America's premier market research, marketing, and data analytics company. And last night were noted to be the most accurate pollsters in our federal election. So thanks for joining us. Thanks to the panelists for the discussion we're about to have. And Heather, over to you.
Awesome. And thanks for having me, Greg. It's good to know that there's life after an election, and having something different to do this morning is a great distraction. So I'd also like to thank Steve and Jay for welcoming me, and Dave, that was just an outstanding high energy presentation. So thanks for setting us up. I'm going to begin with you, Dave. So you've worked with a lot of really interesting companies. In your time with them, how have you seen community expectations shift in terms of level of engagement and priorities? And a bit of a trick question on this is, I like to understand the expectations, but I'd also like to understand what are the expectations that they'll be met? How important is it that companies deliver?
Yep, I think this is at the heart. I think it's a great question, and it's the one I hope everyone watching is thinking deeply about. I like to start with one sort of fallacy, but I like to unpack it, which is we actually came to the corporation scene about 10 years ago asking people, hey, you know what, you can talk to 1,000 people and understand what they think. And we were met with a lot of, well, I gotta be honest, Junior, we don't really care what people think around here. They're supposed to really kind of do what they're told. And the idea that everyone would see each other's thoughts and have a conversation about like our strategy is, you just don't understand the corporation. And now fast forward a decade and people are like, no, it's very, very important. And then they say, actually, it's because the millennials have brought this in. You know, the millennials really value having their voice heard and really value that. And then I turn around to anyone who's respectfully not a millennial and say, hey, how do you value your voice being heard? Do you value having contribution? Do you value having purpose where you work? And I mean, the over 40 crowd is kind of like, Yeah, I also value that. Is it a new value set? I don't think so. I actually don't think so at all. I think there's a new level of demand against an organization that people now have more opportunity to go work other organizations. I was just talking to a very powerful business leader who described today's business environment as, you know what I know is that a person can go work for a competitor tomorrow, basically by opening a new Zoom window. That's effectively how it feels for them. They're working in the same place. And so the demand now to meet a basic human need, I think, which is that we all want to contribute and be heard and not be rank and file. Before, I think there was a lot of fear that you just get fired for thinking that way. And now all of a sudden the tables have switched a little bit. Now it's like, actually, the bar is pretty high. I expect to be heard. And it doesn't matter if you're a millennial or if you're 97 years old. That's just an expectation. And so the business has to react.
I'm going to take it to Jay, if that's all right. Jay, tech and ESG, that's a big conversation. You operate in a wide variety of jurisdictions with complex social challenges, and you're being asked by investors and regulators to demonstrate your commitment to the S in ESG. How would you tell us about Teck's approach to meeting these requirements, and what's changed in the last 10 years for you?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Heather. By the way, I just want to start first of all just by just acknowledging we are all, I think, working today on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm downtown Vancouver today, and I just want to express my gratitude for this opportunity. I'll maybe start with the sort of the formal answer to this question and give you a sense of my impression. There's four components to the way we consider our relationship with the communities we work with. I'm going to speak largely about our external relationships here. You show up on the social management approach. You say to yourself, first of all, like, what are your impacts? Right? You know, you're there to manage primarily the impacts of your operations. And I think what's evolved is we don't just think about the physical impacts of that work when you're building a mine or operating a mine, but also like what are the impacts on the quality of life, the cultural impacts, the impacts on livelihoods. These are all things that are increasingly known and matter. And then the second piece of that is how do you respond to events when they happen, right? Grievances, incidents, and this goes a lot to the way, Dave, I think you talked a little bit about, you know, process fairness, right? So how do you treat people when they do have a problem? How do you respond to that, and how do you create a relationship at a one-to-one level? The third piece we always think about then is what are the benefits that flow from what we're doing? How do you think about things like taxation, jobs? How do you think about social contributions as a way to contribute to the growth of the community you're operating in? But now that really matters without that fourth piece, which is that engagement piece. And I think that we have to think of that question both in a not just a quantitative but a qualitative perspective, which is really, I think, the nature of this discussion today. And thinking not just about making sure that's taking place in a comprehensive way, but also how to deal with what we would consider maybe marginal or vulnerable voices, voices that normally would not be represented in those situations. And so that becomes the challenge for us operating in this space is just how do you create the right model to do that? I think when I joined Teck 6 years ago and I started this work, it was very much about license to operate. And so it was really about managing that as a risk profile, you know, and thinking about, okay, well, where does that fit? But increasingly what I'm coming to realize in this work is that what you're really managing and what you're really talking about is relationships. What you're really delivering to your organization is relationships, because those relationships are not just there to help you operate on an ongoing way. It's your feedback loop. It's actually where you understand where the critical risks are for your business, and also where your improvement areas are. And so for me, the social management approach that truly works is not just those systems, but it's also those core relationships. And that comes down to the people you have on the ground. And so, you know, my big learning over the last, you know, several years on this as we've been evolving in this S space is that really when we're delivering those relationships, it's really going to be on those one-to-one levels and on those established long-term on-the-ground relationships that we have between our employees and between the communities we work with. That's the most significant. Lots more to say on this space, but I think we'll get back to it at some point. So.
Amazing. Over to Steve. So Steve, TransLink has just an amazing network of stakeholders. You're so important in the Lower Mainland. You've got your passengers, neighbors, businesses, multiple government layers that you work with. So managing those stakeholders is one key piece as a service provider, but you're also an infrastructure provider, and you deliver major projects for BC. What's your perspective on community engagement, and how do you see that evolving in the coming years?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And you know, I wish I had read Dave's book before we got here, because there was so much in his presentation that resonated with me and the way we have to approach our communities and that we work in and work with. So I'm going to tap into that a little bit. I mean, there's so many communities that we work with, but they're not just the community as the city or the community as the town. There are communities of customers, there are communities of stakeholders, there are communities of taxpayers, communities of employees, and we have to think of each of them as their own community with their own needs, their own viewpoints, and we have to take different approaches to each of them. So there's this multitude of communities. We have to be mindful and respectful and inclusive of all of them and all of their different viewpoints. And that's really important. I mean, it's about building up that relationship capital that Dave was referring to early on in his presentation. You have to build up those relationships so that you build up trust when you need that trust. When you go to communities to talk about a change or a project or a change, even a change bus route can create impact on a community. You need to have built up that trust in advance. And the best way to do that is by talking to communities when you don't need something from them. It's to go out there and listen to communities, ask them for their viewpoints, ask them what they're thinking about for the future. And one thing I think it's important to note is that each community is different in terms of how you reach out to them and how you listen to them. You know, everyone learns differently. And I'll just give you one, I think, obvious example that people get to. When we're out there dealing with an engagement on Surrey Langley SkyTrain or on our Transport 2050 long-term plan, we actually engage in multiple languages. Up to 7 different languages we use to talk to communities and talk to people and ask them questions and get their points of view across. Because otherwise you're excluding a huge body of people at the ground level that are impacted by our projects. So we want to talk to new Canadians. We want to talk to people that don't traditionally come out to open houses, people that don't traditionally speak up. Dave used that great example of those kind of anonymous surveys where leaders will say, if you have something to say, come out and say it to me directly. Well, and as a matter of fact, most people won't do that. They don't do that. And so you need to find a way to get in there and draw those people out and listen to them and get their voices. Urban Indigenous people, new Canadians I mentioned. One more example I'll use, and that is you also have to look at your mainstream channels. You know, when we were doing our Transport 2050 long-term plan, we decided the best way to get to the broadest number of people in our region was to set up at the PNE. Seems obvious, right? But when you do it, you don't just set up a table with a couple pamphlets. You go out there and be engaging and be interesting and create awareness and draw people in. And we did that with everything from virtual reality glasses to moving maps and surveys. So you have to hit it at all levels, but the key point is to do it when you don't need to do it. That's when you start the conversation.
Very wise. I want to talk about ESG and how the conversation around mental health is being viewed and managed by us as employers. So Leger has been tracking mental health of Canadians since the start of the pandemic. And today it's actually on the upswing, but it's still not great. There are 6 in 10 Canadians would rate their mental health as poor or as not good, I guess. 4 in 10 Canadians rate their mental health as good or better. So we have this large portion of Canadians who say they're not doing so well at home. When I started my career, one of the first pieces of advice that I had was not to bring my emotions or my problems to work, that work was a place that you were productive and you didn't talk about your mental health at work. That's changed. Can you tell me, and I'm going to start with Jay and then move to Steve and Dave. Let's talk about how we're managing that in our own workplaces and the impact that that's having.
Yeah, I mean, Heather, this is a great question, and I think it's for us something that we've been thinking about, both from a workplace perspective in terms of employees, but also the people we work with. And that, I think what we have to recognize is in this, especially in this COVID environment, we are our lives are intertwining in ways that they really haven't before. We are in each other's homes, right? And to some extent, it's all coming through the same medium, right? Friends, family, work, all those things. And so, there's going to be a blend there. So, I mean, I think there's some really obvious spaces on the employee side around, are your services in place to be able to provide the supports you need? I think a lot of us have really great programs in place that frankly, a lot of us have probably never thought of using until this latest field, where it's not so much about a crisis, but about, like a more of a chronic issue that people are dealing with. And it's been difficult, I think, for a lot of organizations to make that available because there's just such an uptake of that, right? And so making sure you have those good supports, sort of at a structural level for people to deal with that individually. But I do think as a leader of a team, you do have to be considering, I guess, the way that you're using the space and time with your teams. Like, are you having those check-ins? Are you having those one-to-ones? Are you actually asking the question? And I think that's, to be honest with you, how are you doing is not often how people kick off a meeting, but I think it has to be. And I'll just add, I think, externally, I think it's really been telling for us as well, because you have to recognize that this cumulative stress that's going on externally is just as great. And so when you're meeting somebody on a topic or on something professional, recognize that they're coming from a completely different context, that they are probably under a great deal of stress, and there's a lot of competing issues. And to just give the time and the space and I guess afford the opportunity for even the people you work with outside your organization to process at the speed they need to process. And that's not always convenient. That's not always going to be how we want to get business done. It's absolutely necessary to make the types of connections that Dave was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that, of course, with what Jay just said. But, it's funny, I think back to how long has it been, a year and a half ago or so, and we had the novelty of working from home, and you had your after work, virtual get-togethers. People were doing virtual 6 o'clock drinks, and there was a novelty factor. And after a year and a half and almost 2 years now, or approaching 2 years now, it gets tiresome. Right. And so that impact is weighing on a lot of people. And so I agree exactly with what Jay said, but I would add a couple of things. I think it's also important to remember that work does matter, that people need to understand what the purpose of their work is. It's up to leaders like us to get out there and make sure that your staff, your team is reminded that they have a purpose, that we're here to do an important job. We're here to do important work. In our case, it's to keep the transportation system moving, to move hundreds of thousands of people around the region every single day to their jobs, to their schools, to their appointments. That's critical work that has to get done. There's purpose to their work. I would suggest there's also something else we can do, and that's offer to keep training them. Keep offering them opportunities to enhance their skills, enhance their knowledge, invest in them. It's a reminder to them that they matter. And they want an employer, they want leaders who think that they matter. And that's another way, in addition to all of the support structure that we can offer, it's another way for us to tell our team that they matter to us and they matter to the organization.
Yeah, I think I want to pile on and be intentionally provocative. So one thing is that my father passed away in his mid-50s, which left me as a young kid in his 20s with a pretty serious anxiety disorder, debilitating for nearly a year and a half. And as a CEO now, I guess the word is almost proud to talk about it. I think it's important to talk about the fact that I couldn't work for a long time and I was suffering from mental health challenges. And so removing that stigma is really critical. And at the same time, I want to actually look at the other end and say, what I see businesses doing is, okay, well, our people need mental health support. Our people need social things afterwards. Our people need meet and greets. Our people need all sorts of things in order to function in this new environment. And then the organization is sort of like, wait a sec, have we actually become a life support for our people? Where does the line draw where I need to pull from my community, the professionals in my world, my family, my support network? This is my business. So ThoughtExchange, we try our best to provide mental health support and flexibility and things like that. At the same time, where does that become all of a sudden your purpose, your mental health? Like, how many parts of your humanity is coming from your job, and is it the role of the job to do that, or where is there a line where all of a sudden we have to say, actually, for clarity, the business actually needs to say, we kind of don't offer you, capital P purpose, or maybe we don't offer you the ticket to mental health, because maybe that's too much pressure on a leader to say, I don't know, actually, I'm not a mental health professional, I'm not a purpose professional. I'm just curious to is there a line? Do businesses go too far right now as we're starting to figure this out?
Yeah, I don't know if businesses can go too far. Every business is going to be different. I do think you're right to point out or ask the question around whether or not we could go too far. And I think the answer is, yeah, we could go too far. We aren't the family for those individuals, and frankly, we have to look at them all as individuals. Every member of our team comes at it in a different way. They have different needs, they have different approaches, they have different perceptions, and some of them would say, back off to us as employers. They would say, I've got a private life. I don't want you to be involved in my private life. You can be there if I need you, but that's all I want you to do. Don't go over the top. So it's a tough line. It's a tough line to walk. I think we need to, as Jay pointed out, be supportive of our team and be supportive of our employees, but we also need to take care not to go over the top and offer too much and be too smothering of our employees either.
But Dave, I think just to pick up on that one comment, I mean, that idea of purpose and reminding people of what they do, and not just its value, but where it fits and how do they fit. And I think that this is one of the things that, as we're all disconnected and being, floating boxes in the world now, but also teams work in a lot more isolation, right? That the sort of the water cooler, all those things that basically those natural connectivities to the organization, to the community of work, those aren't there. And so, are you sharing enough information? Are you telling people what's going on? Are you telling them how what they're doing is flowing into the bigger picture? Are you giving feedback in a regular way? I think we have to double our efforts in those spaces. It's just not obvious like it used to be, and I think we took for granted how much of that was organically happening in a conventional workplace, because it does not happen in this type of workplace now.
That's great, Jay. And I think actually there's a bit of a moment, which is the end of The Sixth Sense. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. He was dead the whole time. If you haven't seen it, there's something also happening in our businesses right now, which is like during the pandemic, people are like, I don't feel totally attached to the vision of the organization or feel like I'm totally aligned. And we're like, oh, we can see that now. And everyone's like, and by the way, I never really did either before, but I couldn't really tell you because we were all in a room together and I had to pretend. Because I think it has exposed a missing in corporations as opposed to necessarily introduced it. But I really agree with you. How do you get people to feel like when they wake up every day, their life matters because their job is important?
I could talk with you guys all day, and maybe I'll call you later and we could have another Zoom call. But last question. What gets measured gets managed. And ESG it's good for the world, it's good for our companies, it's good for our employees. But how do we invest in this? How do we measure what we're investing in this? How do we know that we're doing it right? Let's go with Steve.
Oh, geez. Thanks, Heather. I think it's our organization, TransLink, moves 500,000 people every single day around the region. So our mission is inherently important for the region. We get that. We understand that. So our leading way of measuring is ridership. It's how many people are using the system. And to get to the ridership that we want to get to, we need to make sure that we are providing service that's affordable, that's convenient, and that's safe. And so all of our measures are centered around those key factors that we know drive ridership. That to us is sort of the most straightforward way for us to understand if we're doing the job that we're meant to do here.
Jay, do you measure ESG?
Yeah, I think this is more of a journey for the mining sector. Our mining is traditionally based in usually the absence of certain things, right? And so when we think about health and safety, it's really absence of injuries, absence of fatalities, absence of environmental incidents. It's often in the negative that you measure those things. That's not how the social space works, right? It is not, and for a long time, it was really mining sort of took the view: if we don't have many complaints and we don't have major issues, we're fine. But the reality is there's very little correlation between those behaviors and what we're really talking about here, which is levels of trust, quality of relationship, durability, resiliency. These are the types of things you're looking at. And so, I think where we're moving as a sector is obviously, how do you ask those questions more effectively? A lot of it, in my view, comes back to the one-to-one relationships you hold. My biggest barometer of success, measure of success, is my team. is my people on the ground and my employees and telling me what's going on, how are people feeling, how are they reacting to what we're doing. That's qualitative. That's not highly quantitative. That's hard to report. But to be honest with you, those are the types of things we've actually got to get our head around, because those are really where that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of, are we doing our job right?
I'll just make a quick comment on hope, which is that, so this is a sort of what I would call a non-conversational sort of event where I speak. We're a bunch of white people with one female moderator. We're sort of we're fumbling through, how do we measure this in a really great way? Our answers aren't great, but we're talking about it. I have investors that are actually coming and asking me to speak about this. People who have put millions of dollars into our company want this to be a priority. Our president and co-founder of the company is actually leading our ESG efforts. So in that, what I see out there is that there's an appetite, and we're talking to some global CEOs that are like, I need to get my brain around this. We need to figure this out. So I would say that as a general level, I haven't seen organizations really thriving on this, but, and ThoughtExchange, we take it very seriously. We're actually finding a way to meaningfully measure this. At the same point, I haven't seen a great shining example. So I can just say that I think there's hope in this area. And even the nature of this panel, us being these people, and it's at least acknowledging that we have white male privilege as we talk about these things, is like a great step. The fact that we need ESG is a great step, because I think that's going to make our business community stronger.
You know, I'd add to that, Dave. In my role as general manager with Leisure, I do a lot of the corporate assessments when we work with clients, and you know, people like Steve send out these great 75-page long surveys that we have to fill out to be suppliers, which we're always happy to do. But more and more, we're seeing ESG questions in there that are quantitative, that they want to know numbers about the number of women who work in organizations. They want to understand our BIPOC community. They want to understand where we're investing or what our priorities are in this area. So I've seen in the last 18 months that have an exponential change. And I think that in a year, there will be some more standards around this, that we're all talking in the same way about this. So with that, I would love to ask each of you for one last thought, and then we'll hand this back to Greg. Dave, do you want to start?
Appreciation. I think this is a really important conversation. And a general statement is to not underestimate. A lot of people say, should I focus on this sort of thing, or should I just focus on profitability? And the answer is, of course, that is a completely crazy question, because those two things are just interlocked. People that have great people that feel ownership over what they're doing are going to be the businesses that crush all the competition.
Jay?
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I guess what I just add is, we're talking about the S, is to recognize that ultimately everything is about the S. Every aspect of our business is ultimately values driven, and it's driven by what people believe is important. And we've seen that evolve over time. And so, you know, don't for a second sort of set it in its own category as a thing to manage. It's in fact, I think, what overlays almost everything we do. And those are going to change over time. Those values are going to shift over time. And, you know, businesses have to professionalize their perspective on that. This is real work, and I'm proud to be in it. And so it's great to be part of this conversation. Thanks.
Steve, the last word's yours.
Inspired by Dave's presentation, invest in relationships, not just transactions. Build good process, so show your math so that people trust the process. And you look for ways to unify your communities, unify your stakeholders, unify the people that you work for. It's so important to the future of your organization and the society we work in.
As a pollster, I say, show your math. Couldn't be a better lesson.
Right.
Greg, back to you.
Thanks so much, Heather. I can't thank you all enough for sharing your insights and your experiences. I found this incredibly valuable, and I'm sure all of you did as well. There's so much to unpack in what this group has talked about today. And I know that in the coming days, we're going to have the video available, so you can go back and re-listen to some of these really profound comments that I was writing vigorously to try to keep up with. I've had the privilege of working with and watching Jay and Steve and Dave and Heather in action. As you saw today, they're just authentic and exceptional leaders that are invested in building trust and being critical listeners and thought leaders that take action to draw people in. And in doing so, they're making their organizations and their communities and the people around them better. So I just want to personally thank all of you for your perspectives today, and also what you're doing every day. it really is making a difference. And it just gives you a sense that when you treat people in the ways that we discussed today, you really can make a difference for your organization, the communities you operate in. Asking the right questions of the right people and gathering those perspectives build common understanding and interests, which are always fraught with challenge, but it gives you the opportunity to really go forward to improve your organization, the product, and the business purpose that you have as a collective organization.